Here, Breathe Life Ministries, and welcome to our final installment of our new author introduction. Breathe Life Ministries is really proud to introduce Nicole Flemming to you, our listeners and followers. Nicole Flemming has written the book My Escape: Born into a Dysfunctional Family. And her experience is relevant in so many ways because she was born to an Irish mother and an Afghani father. And so she has, and she was raised in Great Britain. She now resides in Ireland, but she has written an account of her life growing up in this family. And she experienced what many girls in Afghanistan are experiencing today, being raised under extremist ideologies and traditions that do not honor women as human beings. Women are considered something very property. They're considered, and even in many respects, less than property. They are not given the dignity of choice in anything. Their decisions are dictated by their father and their brother. Anything that they do it must go through the father or the brothers. There is no choice given to these girls. Imagine being born. You're born with potential. Human beings are created in the image of God with abundant potential. Some are created with the talent of dancing. Some are created with the talent of singing. Some are created with the talent of medicine and science and math. Others are born with unlimited potential to become an author. Some are born with unlimited potential to become a painter or a sculptor. But in this society, none of that is honored because you are a woman. You are born female. And the only purpose you are there to serve under this ideology is to bear children and serve your master, the man. You may fall in love with someone, but you're not allowed to pursue that person you fall in love with because they're not the person your father gave you to, maybe as young as 5. I was listening to an account yesterday on YouTube, and this was filmed in about 2010. And the reporter was from Iran. She was a woman. And she was reporting on women locked away by their fathers in a prison not far from Kabul, Afghanistan. One of these women, she was about 15. She had run away from the man that her father had given her to. This man was as old as her father, and her father was quite elderly. She'd been given to him, and this man was abusive to her. So she ran away pregnant. And this other man found her, and she was very hungry, and she begged this man to kill her rather than go back to this man she'd been married off to by her father. The man took pity on her, and he married her. And it was found out, and her father took her away from this man and put her in prison for 6 years. Her sentence was 6 years. The man who she was married to now was compassionate and in love with her, very much so. So he turned himself into the police. And he too was imprisoned for the same crime for 6 years, serving a 6-year sentence. These two people's only sin was wanting to be married to each other. And she was not alone in this. There were hundreds of women in this prison serving the same sentence for the same reason, simply refusing to be married off as a child bride. My friend Nicole Flemming went through a similar experience, and I'm going to read that account to you, but I'm not going to finish it because I want you to read the book yourself. But I am going to introduce you to the experience she went through when her father kidnapped her from her mother and was attempting to marry her off to somebody he had arranged for her to be married to in Afghanistan. So here we go. I'm going to share my screen. And again, this is taken from Nicole Flemming's book, My Escape, Born into a Dysfunctional Family. And we're going to begin here in chapter 10. After the birth, my mother returned home with her new baby, Shina. Life was good for her. Jabrut, who is Nicole's father, was a doting father, giving them everything they could possibly need. Life was so good that my mother went to her parents' house and told them she was going to take me home. At this point, Nicole had been living with her grandparents because Jabrut, her father, had been very abusive to Nicole. And after a time of separation, Jabrut had promised her mother that he had turned over a new leaf and was on the straight and narrow and going to be performing as a kind and loving father and husband. Jabrut hadn't been at all violent towards her. He had changed his ways. Frank, my grandfather, told her there was no way except over his dead body she would take me with them. He told her a leopard never changes its spots. My father would never change. No matter how nice she should have listened to his advice. The old Jabrut returned with a vengeance several months later. One evening, my mother had brought Shina over to my grandparents. She was chatting with Frank and Mary. I was playing games in my bedroom. I heard the doorbell, so I came out to investigate and saw my grandfather open the door to find Jabrut there, obviously drinking. He pushed past my grandfather, saying he was there for Louise. He saw her and shouted, "Get home," as he wanted his shirt ironed and dinner. He was going out later with his mates. They began to argue, shouting at one another. My grandfather attempted to intervene, but Jabrut went to grab Louise's arm. She screamed, "Jabrut, stop! Stop! Please stop!" My grandfather was in his late 50s, but was old for his age due to how he had led his life. Also, he had hip problems. He managed to take Shaina away from my mother's arms as she nearly fell on the floor. Jabrut lashed out at him, sending him off balance, spinning backwards. He hit the wall behind him and slumped to the floor. Luckily, Shaina was still in his arms and was unharmed. He managed to stagger to his feet and said, "If you don't go now, I will call the police." Letting go of Louise, Jabrut grabbed hold of my arm and walked out, dragging me with him, slamming the door behind. My grandfather and mother followed, but my father had taken me into the only elevator, so they had to run down the steps from the 5th floor. By the time they got to the exit door on the ground floor, my father had locked me in the back of his car. He started the engine and sped off. I remember that night very well. I was so upset and didn't really know what was happening. All I knew was that my father was in a mad rage. He drove the car around the parking lot at speeds that made the tires screech. We ended up back where we started. My mother and grandfather were in front of the car as he came to a sudden stop. He revved the engine at them and laughed, creeping forward little by little. Then suddenly he took his foot off the brake and the car surged forward. He pressed the brakes hard, coming to a stop with a skid. My mother had pulled her father out of the way before he came to a halt. My grandmother was watching from her balcony, as were numerous neighbors who had been alerted by the noise and wondered what was going on. My father laughed loudly. He was toying with them. To him, it was a game. He slammed the gears into reverse and sped backwards, spinning the car around with the front end facing away from my mother and grandfather, who were now on the pavement. He saw them in the mirrors and reversed at high speed towards them, mounting the curb, shouting he was going to kill them. Luckily, they were behind a concrete traffic post, so they got out of the way. My father reversed straight into it, which stopped the car with a big jolt. He didn't have his seatbelt on, unlike me. The collision had flung my father backwards and then forwards, his head smacking into the windshield, which shattered. My mother opened the passenger door, popped the lock on the rear doors, and got me out. I was crying hysterically from sheer terror. He managed to exit the car, saw us, and all the rest of the people now appeared in the parking lot and ran off. My mother took me upstairs, back to my grandparents' flat, to calm me down. My grandfather poured himself a large Irish whiskey to calm down. This incident still haunts me to this day, as I thought he was going to kill us. Me, my da, and my mother. My grandmother kept going to the balcony to see if the police had arrived. They seemed to take so long. The good old police eventually turned up much later. They took all our statements and issued a warrant for his arrest. So I'm going to go ahead and leave right there and encourage you all to get this book. There's more accounts there. And actually, I started a little earlier than the actual account of where he kidnaps her and takes her to the airport, where this incident that happened that I just read to you becomes a mechanism of her rescue. But again, I don't want to give away the details because it really is truly a very compelling story that I encourage you to read. Also, Nicole is beginning a new series that will chronicle the true life stories of women and girls in Afghanistan, living in Afghanistan right now. And the more I learn about the mindset that has trapped this society, the more my heart breaks. The truly odd thing about the women that I told you about prior to reading Nicole's story, the women imprisoned for simply not wanting to marry who they were child brides to. I mean, 5 years old. 5 years old. This one young woman who was under arrest and raising her baby in prison. Her father came to visit her while this reporter was interviewing her. And he was sitting happily on the floor with her and smiling and playing with the baby, just like any good grandfather would, completely oblivious to the horrific abuse he was pouring out on his own child. Because tradition in this society teaches that women are property and not entitled to any human rights, that they live at the pleasure of the men. And this is what is appropriate and right for women. They're not allowed to choose who they marry. They're not allowed any sovereignty over their physical bodies. They are not allowed to learn. They are not allowed to exercise the divinely created talents that they were born with. Think about the talents that you have. Maybe they're for singing. Maybe they're for artwork. Maybe they're for mathematics and accounting. What are you passionate about? Imagine not being allowed to exercise those talents because you're a woman. And your only purpose is to serve a man. Cook, clean, bear children. This is your only life function. One young girl was a child bride. This was a different girl that I read about. And she was married off at the age of 5. And her father told her this, that you be sure you obey him, because if you do not obey him, he just might kill you. You're 5 years old. You're being married off to a man the same age as your father. And your father is instructing you to expressly obey this man, because if you don't, he just might kill you. And the very difficult part of this for me to process is that This is entirely acceptable. There is no ability for these adults to understand what they are doing is wrong. They don't understand that what they're doing is actually cruel. This is simply the way things are done from their societal perspective. Uh, it's very challenging for me to process. But I do encourage you to read Nicole's book for her very unique perspective as a child who was raised under this. And how she was able to escape it, and how she is turning that pain into empowerment for other women. So again, this is my final submission of this author introduction. Please read the book. Again, I will leave the links to her book. It's available on Amazon and Kindle and audiobook. My Escape: Born into a Dysfunctional Family by Nicole Flemming. And pray for these young women in Afghanistan. Pray for these men in Afghanistan, that they are awakened to what real life is. That they are awakened to understand the beauty of women as God's creation. To not be a servant, but a co-equal, a helpmate, a helpmate. And I don't know if you can hear my dog Zeppelin, but he is a little upset that he's not in here right now, and he's growling at the door. But anyway, please like this video. Please share this video. Knowledge is power. Know what is going on in the world around you. God bless. And we will see you tomorrow here at Breathe Life Ministries. God bless.